So we're going to talk about cueing for success tonight. And there are all my new photographs that I had done, which is really exciting. I got some really nice new pictures, which I really like.
Yeah.
So tonight what we're going to discuss is cueing styles, 5 steps that you can take to be more successful with your cueing, the actual different cue types that we have, anatomy of a cue. So how, if we start pulling our cues apart, how do we actually approach cueing in the first place? And then I'll just talk about a couple of new projects. One is my new book, and the book launches, and the other one is the new academy that I'm setting up. So just a little bit about me for those of you that don't know me, for those that might be watching the recording that haven't done anything with me yet. I've been teaching Pilates for over 27 years, and I've been training teachers for 20 years. I initially started in London with Leslie Ackland just as an apprentice before there were even any training courses of any note around. And then when I moved to California in 2000, I did the Physical Mind Institute training, which is heavily influenced by the work of Eve Gentry. I went back in 2002 and I completed my master teacher training at that stage. And since then, I've also done my fascial release therapy training. I've done life and business coaching. And I've just recently written a book, so I can now call myself an author, which is kind of feels a little bit pretentious, but there we have it. It's very exciting. So I guess I love teaching Pilates, but the thing that I love the most is to see teachers excel and sort of exceed their own expectations of what they can do, and to help teachers keep their passion alive, because it is a very lonely profession in many ways. Even though we're with people all the time, it can be something that if you don't know how to hand over some of that responsibility to your client, and how to sort of foster that we're in this together type of approach, that it can get quite draining. So it really helps if we understand really good teaching methodology tools that we can use, but also in the way that we invite people to share in the movement experience. So those are the things that really get me all fired up. And then the other thing that gets me fired up is helping teachers with running their businesses, putting really good structures in place and understanding how it all works, so that you don't have to work so hard on your business, but that you can actually focus on doing the teaching that you love. Oh, my picture hasn't come up. Right, so some of our tools that we use when we're teaching is we'll often demonstrate an exercise, we'll use words and explanations, we might ask questions to check in with clients to see how things are going, or whether they're understanding what we're doing. You might use touch, or ask clients to self-touch, especially if you're working through a screen. You might gravitate towards imagery, and then your imagination and your intuition is going to come to play in this. And one thing that I can say is that we are all very unique in the way that we approach our teaching. And so therefore, the way that you cue is going to be uniquely you. Nobody else can teach the way that you teach. So there's no point comparing yourself to anybody else, because you are who you are and you teach the way you teach. And people seek you out or stay with you as a teacher because of the gifts that you bring. So don't ever think that you're not enough or that you don't know enough. It's more about how you communicate with your client that's important than the actual wealth of knowledge that you have. You will build up that wealth of knowledge over the years and over the hours that you spend teaching, as long as you stay curious and open and ready to kind of manipulate things and question things and keep exploring. Then it becomes this really big adventure. Otherwise, if I think about how often I have taught the same exercises over the last 27 years, if I hadn't found something in there for me and enjoyed seeing how different bodies approach or interpret the movements that I'm asking them to do, I probably would have stopped a long time ago. So, you have to find the thing that sparks you up. And the only way to do that is really through the way that you're cueing. There has to be something in there for you to give yourself a challenge. But how can you do this better? How can you help more people to understand what it is that you're asking them to do? So, of course, the biggest thing that we use is our words. And there are many ways that we can use those words. But some of the guidelines I can give you in terms of developing your own style is to keep your cues simple. Don't try and get fancy with them because people don't understand. For most people, movement is really difficult. And finding words to describe movement is even harder. So the more complex you make it, the more you're going to kind of fall into hot water. Think about the quality of the movement that you're trying to convey. That often helps me to find the right words. So if I want something to be slow and smooth, I'm going to look for words that will convey that. So, I wouldn't sort of say something like push, maybe. I might say something like, can you make that movement as long as you can? So really simple, but thinking about the movement quality. The other thing that's important is thinking about cues that tap into different learning styles. Some people really don't get images, and I choose to use a lot of images. I'm a very visual teacher, but I've worked with a lot of clients who really don't get images. And so then I have to switch the way that I teach because I have to find the words that will resonate with them. So if I was using an image, I might then have to switch that to something that is quite literal, do this, then do this, then do that. Especially for a very analytical brain, that works far better. They like to know the process, step 1, step 2, step 3. So, you kind of need to figure out how that person learns and then add your cues to follow that. So if somebody is very auditory, I might use sounds. If somebody is very visual, like if I'm working with an artist, for example, they love it when I use images. And so then I will often have a discussion with them and say, look, this is what I might demonstrate the movement and say, hey, this is what the movement looks like. Or I might get them to do the movement and say, what does that movement feel like? Does it bring up an image? So, those kinds of things, that how that person learns also plays into the way that you're going to be cueing. We often borrow cues from each other. So when you're watching somebody teach, they say something that really resonates for you. And I don't know if you've done this, you go and try it in a class and the whole thing falls flat and nobody understands what you're talking about. And you're going, but it made so much sense to me. And that's probably because you were using the other person's words. Instead of, you have to kind of workshop those images or those cues or those tools that you've learned from somebody else in a way that it sounds authentic to you. So you will have to change the way that you approach it. You have to make those cues your own. So just remember to practice that first, to sort of say them out loud, maybe even record yourself saying them, then try and be your own student. And see if it resonates, see if it works. When you then go and teach, try that cue out, see if it works. If it doesn't, don't walk away from it, try again and see if you can say it in a different way. So if it really matters to you, then you will find a way to make that cue your own. So your best tool in those situations are your eyes. You have to observe the outcome of your cues. You have to see how it translates into that person's body and whether it is clear, whether it is making sense. So don't get stuck on what you say. Be willing to change your cues until you get the movement quality or the movement outcome that you want. Yeah. And it might just be it doesn't resonate for that person, but my best cues are the ones that resonate with at least 80% of the people that I teach. So they kind of become the first things that I'll grab when I'm working with someone. And then if that doesn't work so well with them, that's when I then have to start fiddling around and seeing what best way can I explain to them and get across what it is I want them to understand. So when we really get our cues going, we create these amazing experiences for our clients. And as we create those experiences for them, our experience gets enriched. So one of the first things we need to do in terms of being successful at cueing is we need to learn, practice, and understand those exercises ourselves. We have to be able to put them into our bodies. But it's even more than that. Just putting it into your body is not enough. You have to be able to verbalize the movement. So even if it is just lift your leg, you're still verbalizing that, and practice saying it out loud. I cannot tell you how important it is that when you're thinking about teaching, that you actually teach out loud, even if there's nobody in the room. So I mentioned this just before, but one of the most powerful tools you can have is to film yourself. Don't worry about what it looks like. You don't even have to look at the screen, even if it is just an audio recording. Those are incredibly powerful, where you record yourself speaking and then lie down on the mat, play the recording and follow along. Because very quickly you will go, oh my goodness, I completely missed out saying this very crucial thing about where to put my arm, or, how to find that position. Or you could even find out that you kept quiet for too long, or you gave too many cues in quick succession and managed to confuse yourself. So imagine, what your client's going to feel like. So it really helped with your pacing as well. So if you become your own student, that really helps. One of the common mistakes that I see with new teachers is that they teach at the speed that they would do the exercise, but you actually have to talk faster. You have to give the client the clue to the next thing before they've even done it, because otherwise you're stopping the movement all the time and it becomes a very laborious process. So that all comes down to pacing your cues. As I said again, practice your cues out loud. This will keep coming up. Practice, practice, practice. You cannot teach a group class or even one person unless you've practiced those cues out loud and they feel like you. They come out of your mouth the way that you would speak. If you try and be like somebody else, it's going to fall flat. So you have to practice and make those words your own. The other important thing to remember is that you have to speak in language that your client understands. So there's no point having high-level anatomy language and then translating that to your client, saying to your client, you've got to move your femur in a posterior direction or whatever it is. Don't try and sound fancy, because you will trip yourself up and your client's just going to look at you blankly. So make sure that you formulate your words in such a way that somebody who has never heard of a femur bone can understand what it is that you want them to do. And if you really want them to know that piece of terminology, then you have to teach them. You have to teach them how that particular part of the body moves, what it is called, repeat it, show them images, whatever it is that you need to do. If it's important that they know that bit of anatomy in a way that they can then take that away with them, then you have to teach that bit. You can't just assume that they're going to know. And this is also where we need to really check in with our clients. That's where our questioning tool becomes really important, with asking them, do you understand that? Does that make sense to you? Because quite often people will just nod their heads, but they haven't got a clue what you've said. So you really do have to check in on them. And you need to understand their restrictions, their physical limitations. There's no point asking somebody who's got a frozen shoulder to lift their arm up here, because, if you're not informed about how that body is restricted, then it's going to be very hard to be able to teach them in a way that makes sense as well. And the final thing is, with your cueing success, you have to have something in that class there for you, something that you are working on. I've been known to work on a cue or even an image for anything from a week to 2 or 3 weeks, where I'm refining and refining and refining with every person that I'm teaching, where that is applicable. I will refine the way that I teach that until I've got it really concise. And in the beginning, I'm always too wordy, and then gradually I whittle it down until I've got just the bits that work, so that I can help somebody understand what they're saying. And sometimes that just takes time. So now we're going to look at different cueing types. So the first one is your anatomical or your form cue. Now, I know I said don't use anatomical words, but your thigh bone is an anatomical term as far as I'm concerned. So any part of the body that you're naming, like an arm or a shoulder, that could be seen as an anatomical cue. Yeah. So lift your arm is an anatomical cue. Or if it is slide your arms wide across the mat, or if it is lying on your back, that's a form cue. Yeah. So those are really important because that helps your client to set up for your exercise most of the time. The next thing that we can, and they're not in any particular order, is we can talk about imagery. Now, imagery is something that I use a lot. It's something that I originally studied when I did my dance degree. I did an entire paper on it. I've done work with Eric Franklin. I've done work with Bruce Hildebrand, who is the pioneer Franklin method educator in Australia. And it's been a staple for me for a very long time. But an image needs to make sense. The reason why images are so powerful when we really get to use them, and if it is something that you gravitate towards, is that our mind sees in pictures. We don't see in words. So if we can really create the right picture, our client can immediately understand what it is that we want them to do. So to give you an example, with imagery, a word as simple as melt, and this is one of Eric Franklin's favorite ones, using the word melt is such an incredible word to use. So if I said to you, relax your shoulders, usually what happens is that people tense up or they jam their shoulders down. They really become quite rigid and restrictive. But when you surprise them with a word, like the word melt, all of a sudden they go, oh, that's different. And you immediately see the shoulders just soften and drop. And it's this sort of long, slow movement. It's not this jerky movement that you often see when you ask somebody to relax their shoulders. So, and then I will often say to people, so when I said the word melt, what image did you see? And that gives me a big clue as to whether that person is a visual learner or not, because they will immediately respond with, oh, I saw ice melting in a glass, or I saw ice cream melting on a hot summer's day. If I have somebody who is not that way inclined, what they will often say to me is, oh, I could just feel my shoulders relax. They just sort of slid down. So then I know that imagery doesn't really work for them. The word melt worked. It is still an image, but they didn't see in a picture. They saw in an action. So they might be a bit more of a kinesthetic learner. Or they could just be somebody who's quite literally step 1, step 2, step 3. I did hypnosis with a guy, and he reckoned that the people who are very step 1, step 2, step 3 orientated are all called accountants, and that they don't like images, and that's why hypnosis doesn't work for them. I'm not sure how true that is, but certainly in my experience with the accountants that I have worked with, a lot of them didn't respond to my images. They just roll their eyes at me and say, yeah, whatever, Tania, yeah, I'll be a jellyfish, whatever that is. The next cue is directional. So I have a terrible time with left and right in the studio because I'm constantly moving around the room and looking at people's bodies from different angles. I've completely lost the plot with left or right. So there's no point in me telling anybody to lift their left or their right leg or their left or their right arm, because most of my clients get confused with that as well. So bi-directional cue, what I will say is, can you lift your door arm up, or can you move your ladder barrel leg, or if hopefully they know what the equipment is, or whatever landmarks are in the room, those tend to be easier to use. Or you can say to them, turn onto your side to face the mirror, turn onto your side to face the stereo, whatever it is, so that they all orientate in the same direction. The next tool that I like to use is touch, and I'm a very kinesthetic teacher, so I use a lot of touch, and there are all kinds of rules and things around that. But when you physically can't touch somebody, like if you're teaching through a screen, or if somebody doesn't want to be touched, you can still cue touch by cueing self-touch. So you can ask somebody to stroke their arm, or you can ask them to lengthen the back of their neck, or you can ask them to put their hands on the front of their belly, or on the chest and on the belly for their breathing, or whatever it is, or around the sides of the rib cage. So you can cue self-touch. You're still cueing touch, okay? So just be very clear with that as well. Sound cues I do find very helpful. I had one very auditory orientated person that I was teaching, and that was probably the most auditory person I'd ever worked with. And it was really interesting because this was mainly in a group situation at the New Zealand School of Dance. And it got to the point where I had a sound for the common sort of changes that he had to make in his body if he'd forgotten. And even if I was working with somebody else, if I was looking up and I saw him doing something and that he needed that particular cue, I would just make the sound and he would immediately change. And he knew exactly what to do. So that was a really phenomenal way to explore sound cueing. But Kathleen Stanford Grant was a really big one on using sound cue for roll-ups in particular. So, I never did a roll-up with Kathy without having to say my full name, my address, my telephone number. And I had to take that entire duration to come up into sitting and that entire duration to get back down on the floor. So whichever way, some people use counting from 1 to 10. I'll often actually use an imagery cue that is a bit like a sound cue. If somebody's got a lot of jaw tension, where I make them do mouthwash. So in a way, that's a sound cue, but it's also a sort of image cue that sort of go together. And sometimes when you trick somebody's brain into really thinking about something else, they forget about what normally bothers them. So if they usually have neck pain, if I get them to do a sound, like I ask them to go, ah, or I get them to do mouthwash or anything like that, they don't have any pain in their neck because they're having to release their jaw. Often the jaw is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to neck tension whenever we're doing anything where the head is lifting up off the ground. So your sound cues can be incredibly helpful in that situation. So your descriptive cues are sort of a mixture of all of those things together. So that's, what really kind of helps you to create the bridge from one movement into the next, or from one position into the next position. And that's also where our word choices become really important. So looking for words that conveys that quality of movement again becomes really important here, rather than just saying, stretch your leg out. You could maybe say, can you make your leg really elastic and then recoil? Or, again, using quite refined words, but not complicated words, but words that really convey meaning will help you to pull all of this together. So now we're just going to look at the basic anatomy of a cue. Now, this doesn't mean this is set in stone. You can move these things around, but in general, when we are looking to build a cue or a series of cues to be able to teach somebody an exercise, this is roughly what we will go through. So first of all, it's really hard to teach an exercise if you don't know it. And it's really hard to teach a class if you haven't prepared the class and you don't know which exercises you're going to teach, especially in the beginning. So I don't sit down and write out classes anymore, but I'm usually preparing in my head as I'm busy talking to somebody and they telling me what their bodies are going through. Things start falling into place in my head. So I have this little checklist in my head that I go through. So that helps me to decide where I'm going to start, some of the highlights that I'm going to be reaching during that class, and sort of where I'm going to go to. And that might change as we go along, depending on what they're reporting back to me. But, within the first 2 or 3 minutes, a plan is formed. In the past, I used to spend, quite a bit of time working out my classes and my structures, and then sort of going through them at the end and seeing what worked, what didn't. And that's what then eventually allowed me to be able to do this without really thinking about it. So if you don't know the exercises, it's going to be hard to teach. End of story. In general, the first thing we do is we cue the position. We're not just going to start teaching the exercise, right? So if somebody's standing up, you might ask them to lie down. And then you want to tell them how to lie down. So you want to lie on your back. You want to extend the legs out along the mat, or bend your knees, placing your feet on the ground in line with your sitting bones. Relax your arms down next to your body. All of those are position cueings. They also sort of your directional cue, your descriptive cue, whatever it is, so that we've got that person in the right position. Now comes the curly bit. Do we ask people to breathe first, or do we ask them to do the movement first? So for me, that is dependent on the person. Usually when I first start working with somebody, I will teach them the movement and I won't say anything about the breath to start with. I find that if I talk about the breath first with most people, that's what they get hung up on. Oh, am I supposed to inhale or exhale? Oh no, I've got all the breathing wrong. And they get really stressed, and then the movement doesn't happen, or the movement happens under tension. So I tend to teach them the movement first and give them an opportunity to practice that movement. Then I might say, if it feels available to you today, could you try doing that on an exhale and see how it feels? So now I'm offering them a bit of choice. They can choose to exhale or not. If they're going to get stressed about it, then I say, forget about the breathing for now. Let's just focus on the movement. We'll get there. So that they know that it's important, but I'm not going to expect them to get everything right. And I think that takes a lot of the stress out, because otherwise it becomes really an unpleasant experience for people. But also giving them that opportunity, inviting them to choose whether they add the breath or not. And it's the same for all the movement I teach them as well. I say, well, what do you think will happen if we did this instead of that? What would happen if you inhaled instead of exhaled? How does that feel on your body? Yeah. The next thing I would then do after they've had an opportunity to practice the movement I've asked them to do is I might then start layering my cues. And most of my cues will be layered based on what I am observing. So let's say they were doing a leg circle and they weren't able to keep their hips still as their leg was moving independently. I might give them a cue about that. So I might say, oh, do you remember that seesaw action we worked on before? Do you think you could keep your seesaw really still this time as you moved your leg around? So only make that circle as big as you can keep your seesaw still. And then again, give them a chance to practice. Say, oh yeah, that looks a lot better. See, it helps if you make the circle a bit smaller. That was really good. All right, now let's try and see if you can make it a bit bigger now that you've got that, or, whatever it is, or we might end the exercise there. But it's really important to give them a chance to practice what it is that you're asking them to do. So only one issue at a time, because otherwise they're going to get confused. It also helps you to stay calm in that teaching situation instead of saying, oh no, there's 6 things wrong. How am I going to fix all of those things? You're not going to. So that's okay. Just take the most important one. There's time. We can fix the other things later. Let's just get the most important things sorted first before they feel like a complete failure. And if you're really confused, ask for help. That's the best thing to do. Just kind of move on. Just go, that was a great start. We'll revisit this next week, and saying, oh, who am I going to ask to help me with this? I don't know where to go from here. Yeah. So that's okay. It's all right to ask for help if you've run out of ideas. Good. Right. So here we go, Nina. Talking about my book, which is, a very, very exciting development. 20 years in the making, really. This book, and it's the pre-sales are open now on Amazon.com, and I think, well, it's pretty much on all of the Amazons. So if you're in the UK or anything like that, you can certainly order it from there. And then I've got 2 free book launches that are coming up. The one on the Friday night in Europe, which is, I think, something like 6:30 a.m. in New Zealand, will be on the 29th of April for people in Europe. And that will be hosted by Anita Horry, who is a teacher in Spain. And when she saw my book, she immediately contacted me and said, I want to launch your book in Europe, Tania. So we started working together to achieve that. And I will also have Bruce Hildebrand as my keynote speaker. And I'm eternally grateful to Bruce because he will be up at 4:30 in the morning Melbourne time to launch the book in Europe with me. So there is a very good friend right there. And then we will have it on the Saturday, the 30th of April at 12 o'clock will basically be for the rest of the world. So 12 o'clock New Zealand time, it'll be 10 o'clock in Melbourne, and then various times in the US. I think it'll be evening for New York and afternoon for San Francisco for the West Coast. So just always check the times for that. So on the book launch, what we'll be doing is I'll be reading an excerpt from the book. We'll have questions. We'll have people buying the book live online. And then for anybody that turns up and stays for the duration, there is a free gift that I will give to everybody at the end of that. And at the moment, the books are at a very low price. The online version is basically about $1, so 99 US cents. And the print book will be for $9.99. So it will go up once the launch is done, but up until then, prices are really low to make it possible for everybody to afford it. I want teachers to have this information. And there is actually also an online course that goes with this. That is a self-study course, and you will find a discount code for that inside the book, which is pretty exciting. Ooh. Yes. And then the next thing that I have coming up, which I'm going to launch on Monday, the 25th of April, is my Teach Pilates with Confidence Academy. So this is, again, because I'm so passionate about helping teachers, I was looking for a way that we could make workshops more affordable, more accessible, but also that you could repeat whenever you wanted to, so that if you've forgotten, that you can go back and you can do that workshop again. So in the academy, you will have access to all of my workshops. Now, obviously, I haven't recorded all of those yet. I'll show you what I've got in a minute, but there are going to be more workshops added all the time. At least one a month will be going on there. every month there will be a presentation of one of the workshops. I'm not teaching the whole workshop in its entirety again. I'm just teaching some of the highlights, or talking about some of the highlights, the key points for that workshop. And then there are also going to be question and answer times. And it's not just about the workshop in the Q&A. I will be available to answer any questions that you have about teaching Pilates or running your business. So normally to spend an hour with me will cost you $180. To do a one-on-one coaching session with me. Basically, you get all of the stuff and that hour or more, depending on how many questions there are a month, for $77 US. Now, of course, you have to work that out in whatever your currency is. And it takes place every second Thursday of the month, and I think it's about 9:30 a.m. in the morning. But if people send me their questions ahead of time, I will answer those questions, and everything will be recorded and will be put into your portal. So there is an online portal with all of the information, all of the recordings for the entire year will be in there. And then as a bonus, everybody will have access to the Pilatespreneur Academy. So that is $67 US a month that you will save if you join the Teach Pilates with Confidence Academy. And this is just a little look at the roadmap for the year. So the first workshop will be the Clarity workshop that I will be discussing. That's about to go up into the portal this week. Then we're going to look at creating classes. The self-myofascial release is already in the portal. Pilates for active older adults is already in the portal for you to do. So you can do all of these multiple times, as many times as you like. Then we're going on to the Wonder Chair, and we're really looking at the hips on the Wonder Chair. Then I'm doing pelvic floor, demystifying the roll-up, Pilates for knees, breathing, demystifying the shoulder, and Pilates meets the contractile fields model, which is a model that I've been using for many years with my mentor, Philip Beach, and then lower back pathologies. And so this will keep going. So there will always be new things added. So, you know, if you stay in the Pilates Academy, you will, for the same price, the $77, you will be getting all of this over that period of time. Of course, once you're no longer a member of the Academy, you will no longer have access to this. So you'll only have access to this for as long as you are a member of the Academy.